Hey, Hare Krishna. So today we're starting the second part of our Nectar of Devotion, part of the this kind of DC Bhakti Shastri course, and we're covering chapters 2 and 3 today. And chapter 2 is entitled "The First Stages of Devotion," and it says that there are three categories to this pure devotional service, Uttama Bhakti. We're going to stick with this mostly, although Prabhupada uses pure devotional service much of the time. But because that word pure devotional service sometimes can refer to a devotee's purity. And but pure devotional service, or Uttama Bhakti, as defined by Rupa Goswami, doesn't require personal purity. It meant, we heard last time how its first two qualities, first quality removes impurities. That someone who takes up pure devotional service can be a very low person on the scale, they say a chandala, and can come to the level of a brahmana, that it destroys all karmic reactions. So sometimes when we use the word pure devotee, we refer to someone who has been purified through the practice of bhakti, pure bhakti. But then otherwise, a beginner in the process of pure bhakti is still can be considered to be a practitioner of pure bhakti, and so can be called, sometimes Prabhupada calls that person a pure devotee. And it was defined as not having any ulterior motives. It's pleasing Krishna according to his desire. It's the activity that you had to perform. It's not just an emotion or a feeling, but that one actually performs service to try to please the Lord in a way that's consistent with how he likes to be served, and that's understood by following the teachings and examples of those who are the previous acharyas, the previous great devotees. They understand how to please Krishna, and if we follow them and listen from them and follow their instructions, then we can be guaranteed of pleasing him. And we also had to have a mood of wishing to please Krishna. We mentioned that the enemies of Krishna may please him by fighting with him, but their intent is not to please. And so that's done. Desire, those actions that please Krishna in the way that he likes to be pleased, and with a mood of pleasing him, are done without any ulterior motive. We do it simply to please him, not to get something from him. I please him, therefore I can get something different from him. And that they have the faith. Pure bhakti means you have the faith that simply by serving Krishna everything is done. You don't need to perform pious activities. You don't have to be a great renouncer, and you don't have to be a great yogi. You don't need any other corresponding process. That's sufficient in itself, bhakti. So the nectar of devotion, or the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, is divided into three kind of categories as it describes different stages of bhakti. They can be described and broken down into smaller levels, but here they talk about three categories. And so there's one that's called, Prabhupada calls the devotional service in practice, and that's sadhana bhakti. There's devotional service in ecstasy, bhava bhakti, and pure devotion, and devotional service in pure love, or prema bhakti. And the first one, practice, it's called sadhana, or it's what you do to reach the goal. And both bhava and prema are considered to be perfections. Sadhya, there's sadhana and sadhya, the practice, or the process by which you approach the goal and then reaching the goal. And because it's understood that that bhava and ecstasy is an immature stage of pure love, and it's now springing directly from the Lord's superior energy. It springs from the soul, from our deepest self. It no longer has any connection with material things. We heard last time that there were 6 different qualities of pure devotion, and I think we even mentioned last time that they're split up. The first stage, sadhana bhakti, has the first 2 qualities, which I'm listing here from the previous chapter. Pure devotional service brings immediate relief from all kinds of material miseries. We analyzed that in some detail last time, what that means. And pure devotional service is the beginning of all auspiciousness. So those 2 qualities are present in sadhana bhakti. And then in bhava bhakti, or devotional service in ecstasy, they still keeps the first 2, but pure devotional service automatically puts one in transcendental pleasure, and pure devotional service is rarely achieved. Those 2 things are there. Devotional service in pure love has the first 4 plus the final 2. 5 is those in pure devotional service deride even the conception of liberation. Pure devotional service is the only means to attract Krishna. One thing we'll see over and over again is this happiness that comes from devotional service. It was part of devotional service as being the beginning of all auspiciousness. It was one of the auspicious things that happened. One experiences a happiness greater than any other kind. And as the one progresses on the path, it increases. So you'll see again, transcendental pleasure is there in bhava, and those in pure devotional service deride even the conception of liberation in prema. That's because of the happiness that's produced there. It's seems to be super concentrated at that level. So it's already extraordinary at the level of sadhana. It's amazing and mind-blowing at the level of bhava, and it's so concentrated that it's basically indescribable on the level of prema. And then how do you get it is a question. It's I guess if you look at the qualities, you should be convinced that it's quite a wonderful thing. And so a natural question would be, where does it come from? How do you get it? And it comes from the mercy of, it can be Krishna, but usually it's the mercy of a devotee. And it says it's measured by the level of taste. Prabhupada calls it taste. So you can say interest or attraction for the devotion. So by, here Prabhupada says, if only by chance a person takes interest in a pure devotee's instruction, he can be accepted and can advance in devotional service. And he says, in this connection, Srila Rupa Goswami suggests that the person eligible for Krishna consciousness or devotional service can be classified by his particular taste. And there's some description is given about how that arises. And Prabhupada says that Rupa Goswami says that generally, if you have a strong inclination, taste, interest, attraction for devotional service in this lifetime, it's a good indication that you've done it in the past, had some connection with devotees or devotional service. And Prabhupada says it completes, it carries over from your last life. So he says if you've done a certain amount, made a certain amount of progress this life, then you begin from that point in your next one. So it can build up over time. And mentions here that Prabhupada mentions, he says that anyway, for persons who have a natural taste for understanding books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, devotional service is easier than for those who are simply accustomed to mental speculation and argumentative processes. We know that that there's a great power of hearing, and we'll understand that it's the hearing is the first actually of the types of devotional practices. And as we'll see as we go on, that's supposed to awaken something that's already within us. So there's something Prabhupada uses that example. He'll use it that it's like waking a sleeping person. So if we kind of are able to open ourselves to receiving the message of pure bhakti, it has a really powerful effect. More than if we're trying to approach it from just a strictly intellectual way. We're trying to use, Prabhupada says, mental speculation and argumentation to try to arrive at the highest truth. If we simply are open enough to listen or to read and hear the message, hear how bhakti works, hear the situation is with Krishna, it will be very effective because it's actually reminding us of something that we know within ourselves, deep within ourselves. So a person like that will make progress much more quickly. And then I've included here the verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita. I think at the time that Prabhupada wrote the Nectar of Devotion, I don't think he'd done the Chaitanya Charitamrita yet. And so he quotes the verses quoted in Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But I don't think Prabhupada had translated the whole thing. And he has commentary and everything on that verse. So now we begin to define devotional service and practice, sadhana bhakti. That's going to be the focus of this particular portion. He's going to mention, in the whole section that we're going to study, the Eastern Ocean, he will mention bhava and prema, but he's going to only cover them briefly. So the sadhana bhakti is going to be our main focus here throughout the Bhakti Shastri course. And so it's Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 22:105, and this is quoted by Rupa Goswami. And when transcendental devotional service, by which love for Krishna is attained, is executed by the senses, it is called sadhana bhakti, or the regulative discharge of devotional service. So again, we heard last time, and we'll hear again, we heard even when we did the Nectar of Instruction, that devotional service is not just a passive sentiment, I have love for Krishna, but it's active. You show your devotion. You use the senses mean also not just the five senses that you receive information from, but the arms and legs, the way that you act on the world. So you use those things. So it says, such devotion eternally exists within the heart of every living entity. So this is an important point that's going to be made in this section. The awakening of this eternal devotion is the potentiality of devotional service in practice. So it's there already, and it's waiting to be awakened. It's within the heart of every living being. And this is I put Prabhupada's commentary here from the Chaitanya Charitamrita because I think also he says it very, very cogently here. He says, this verse is found in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.2.2, because living entities are minute atomic parts and parcels of the Lord, devotional service is always present within them in a dormant condition. Devotional service begins with Shravanam, Kirtanam, hearing and chanting. When a man is sleeping, he can be awakened by sound vibration. Therefore, every conditioned soul should be given the chance to hear the Hare Krishna mantra chanted by a pure Vaishnava. One who hears the Hare Krishna mantra thus vibrated is awakened to spiritual consciousness or Krishna consciousness. In this way, one's mind gradually becomes purified, as stated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Chaito Darpana Marjanam. When the mind is purified, the senses are also purified. Instead of using the senses for sense gratification, the awakened devotee employs the senses in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. This is the process by which dormant love for Krishna is awakened. So, sadhana bhakti is trying to awaken the devotion that already is within us. We'll point out it's not an end in itself. And and here Prabhupada says, this is quoting from the Nectar of Devotion, so practice means employing both the mind and the senses in practical devotional service. For example, he says, a child learns or practices to walk. This walking is not unnatural. The walking capacity is there originally in the child, and simply by a little practice he walks very nicely. Similarly, devotional service to the Supreme Lord is the natural instinct of every living entity. Then he says, one who has no basic walking capacity cannot walk by practice. Similarly, Krishna consciousness cannot be aroused simply by practice. Actually, there is no such practice. When we wish to develop our innate capacity for devotional service, there are certain processes which, by our accepting and executing them, will cause that dormant capacity to be invoked. Such practice is called sadhana bhakti. So it's interesting when he says that there's no such practice, and what he means by that, as far as I understand, is that sometimes we can learn a new skill, and a new skill is not necessarily within us already, but we learn how to do it. I don't think, if we learn how to play a sport, or we learn how to do some kind of whatever it is, some kind of task, that may not be something that's innate and being awakened, but it's something we can practice and learn how to do. So that kind of practice, someone's going to practice their jump shot if they're basketball players, or their serve if they're tennis players. They practice. The football players practice, and all these people practice. And but basketball, golf, or football, these things are not deep within our hearts waiting to come out. It's something that we're learning, and so through practice we can become proficient at those activities. Mm-hmm. And so therefore they can be aroused by practice, and you can become a proficient or expert at doing those things. Devotional service is a different kind of thing, because of the fact that we're trying to awaken something that's already within us. So even if you do, the Prabhupada calls them, he says, there are certain processes which, by our accepting and executing them, will cause that dormant capacity to be invoked. So we might be able to become proficient at some of those practices. We might be able to, come to Mangalarti, go do deity service, chant nicely, do the things that we're supposed to do in regulative practice. We're going to discuss all the elements of that much more in detail later on. We may be able to get good at those things. But if we are not awakening that dormant devotion, if we're not experiencing an increased taste for bhakti by doing it, then it's what's called niyamagraha, which we discussed in the Nectar of Instruction. Just doing the elements of bhakti without trying to become advanced, without really trying to awaken that. So it's not an end in itself. Even if we can do all the right things, say all the right things, I don't think we can do it very long unless we're actually awakening our bhakti. But even if you can, do the right things, say the right things, go the right places, and you might be able to become good at it. But if there's not the intention of going deeper and trying to awaken the bhakti within, and if that's not happening, then it's not so valuable. That's why Prabhupada says you can't do it by practice. You do these things, and they're trying to connect you with the innate dormant bhakti that's there. And so we can monitor ourselves, and if we're just going through the motions, even if we're doing it quite well, then we should be wondering why we're only going through the motions and why we're not trying to access this wonderful thing that lies within. So it's not an end in itself, the activities of bhakti. It has a purpose, which is to awaken the real thing. And then Prabhupada says, Narad Muni mentions this sadhana bhakti in Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th canto, 1st chapter, verse 32. He's quoting here from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Rupa Goswami, a lot of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is quotations of verses, many of them from Srimad Bhagavatam. He makes little philosophical statements and then supports them at length many times with quotations. So when Prabhupada is quoting these verses, he's quoting from Rupa Goswami's work here directly. He says there to King Yudhisthira, "My dear king, one has to fix his mind on Krishna by any means. That is called Krishna consciousness. It is the duty of the Acharya, the spiritual master, to find the ways and means for his disciple to fix his mind on Krishna. That is the beginning of sadhana bhakti." And as we're going to find out here in this section, it's the beginning of sadhana bhakti, and it's the measure of the success of sadhana bhakti. That what we're really trying to do is to always remember Krishna and never forget him. And there's a few passages here that mention that. So that's one way we can test whether we're awakening the bhakti within. Are we just going through the motions, or are we remembering Krishna more and more? And then Prabhupada says, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us an authorized program for this purpose, centered around the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. This chanting has so much power that it immediately attaches one to Krishna. Now, when we talk about that the purpose is to fix the mind on Krishna, it doesn't mean that the other senses aren't being used. It's not that we're closing our eyes and just remembering. But within all of our activities, we're trying to do it. We're remembering to act for Krishna. We're using the senses. This doesn't contradict what was said before about using the senses and being active at all. But the mind is very important component. And Prabhupada says, actually, this is the most basic of all regulative principles. For when there is an order from a superior about doing something, there is simultaneously a prohibition. When the order is that one should always remember Krishna, the prohibition is that one should never forget him. Within this simple order and prohibition, all regulative principles are found complete. The idea is that if we can remember Krishna more and more, Krishna is the all-attractive. That will automatically attract us into further devotion. It will help to awaken that dormant devotion that's in us. So the mind is very, very important. What we're paying attention to, what we're thinking about. We of course ran across this in the Bhagavad Gita, that even if you can kind of control your senses, the mind is the one that's difficult to control. And so here it said that by doing things, here the Prophet says, if this injunction is followed, then all other rules and regulations will automatically fall into line. All other rules and regulations should be treated as assistants or servants to this one basic principle. So, if we're remembering Krishna, then we'll be inclined to see how our lives connect with Him, and we'll be mindful of our actions in terms of our relationship with Krishna. The other hand, he says that we should try to arrange our lives in such a way that we can remember Him. So there's the two things there: always remembering and never forgetting. And so I always understand that to be that sometimes we kind of forget to remember, and then when we remember, then we forget. So if we're not remembering, we should, and if we are remembering, we shouldn't stop. Is how that goes. And so the remembrance helps us to stay focused and remember our purpose and remember our desire. There's a reason we take up the process of devotional service. We think it's very valuable. And then also, he says, by our actions, we try to do things in a way that reminds us of Krishna. And you mentioned the chanting. There's, prasadam, offered food, our various services. We try to arrange our lives in such a way that we can remember Krishna. And by remembering Krishna, we're encouraged to do more and more of that things. It's the two things work well together. But a good measure of our progress is how often we're remembering and how often we're forgetting. It's a good thermometer. And then Prabhupada says that this regulative principle is applicable to all varnas and ashrams, the castes and occupations of life. The principle of remembering the Supreme Personality of Godhead constantly and not forgetting Him at any moment is meant to be followed by everyone without fail. So, as we understand, he's going to say here, these different orders of society and grades of spiritual advancement are conceived in terms of qualification. It is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita that the four social orders and the four spiritual orders are created by the Lord Himself in terms of different individual qualities. So there's generally, different kinds of dharmas or spiritual activities that are given for different sorts of folks, and in whether they have different occupations or in different ashrams. But in this case, this particular one of remembering Krishna and not forgetting Him is applicable to everybody. They may approach this in different ways, but this is still the goal for everybody. So it has universal applicability. Usually the Brahmins, do something different than the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas and the Shudras, and the Sannyasis, have a different code of behavior, than the Grihastas and the. So, but in this case, whatever they do should be trying to lead them towards further remembrance of Krishna, and the basis of their existence should be to try to remember Krishna. It has universal applicability. So this really stands prominently. We're going to hear about all different kinds of procedures and types of sadhana, but this one kind of reigns supreme here. The other ones are supposed to foster that, and it also fosters the practice. Prabhupada says, this is also confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam by a verse which reads, everyone must be engaged in his particular duty, but the perfection of such work should be tested by how far the Lord is satisfied with such activities. The injunction herein is that one has to act according to his position, and by such activities one must either satisfy the Supreme Personality or else fall down from one's position. So here we're talking more just generally about devotional service. He's saying that whatever we do, and depending on wherever, what kind of situation we be in, we should try to do that in a way that pleases Krishna. There's in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, it's mentioned that if there isn't some desire to please the Lord, even with your regular dharma, that you won't be. He says they fall. It says they fall down. You won't be able to hold to your dharma. So this is Bhagavad Gita we read. Also said that the perfection of people executing the varnashram system is to try to please the Lord, and that can raise them up from a lower condition. And it says in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam that if you're not trying to please the Lord by your activities, that you won't be able to maintain your dharma. You'll fall down. So it's applicable to everybody. Anybody can find a way to do it, and if you don't do it, there's a big risk. It's covering both sides of it here. And then Prabhupada makes this statement, I really like this. He says, thus the Krishna consciousness movement is so nice that there is no need of even designating oneself Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, or Sannyasi. Let everyone be engaged in whatever occupation he now has. Simply let him worship Lord Krishna by the result of his activities in Krishna consciousness. That will adjust the whole situation, and everyone will be happy and peaceful within this world. Of course, the main purpose of bhakti is to awaken love of Godhead. But from a social standpoint even, it says that if people are trying to serve the Lord, that it'll create a wonderful situation here on the earth. It's we understand how the earth will become more productive. We think we can't control the weather, but negative weather patterns are also are affected by sinful activities. As it says, the productivity of the soil is connected with, are we using the things that are coming from the soil to please the Lord or not? There's that story in the Bhagavatam with Maharaj Prithu, where Mother Earth was withholding. She said, everybody is so sinful, I'm withholding my bounty from them because they're not using it for the pleasure of the Lord. That's why it's supposed to be there. Then Prabhupada says, if one regularly executes such service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master, then he gradually rises to the platform of serving in pure love of God. So there's the kind of succinct and beautiful statement of why we want to perform devotional service. It's not just to have a nice, happy life on the earth and have there be peace and prosperity, although that thing will happen if people do that, if people try to please the Lord by their activities. But the real thing is that we want to rise to the platform of serving in pure love of God. And it has that power. The sadhana bhakti has that power to do that by connecting with what's already there within us. But we can't just look at the surface. The activities of bhakti are not ends in themselves. There has to be that purpose to please the Lord, and that desire to advance, and that desire to connect with what's already inside us. And then it says that there's two kinds of sadhana bhakti. We're going to talk mostly about Vaidhi bhakti, and there will be some discussion later on about the other kind, Raganuga bhakti, but most of this section is going to be about Vaidhi bhakti. And it's defined as, Vaidhi comes from vidhi, or the rules and regulations that are given especially in the scripture. So it says Vaidhi bhakti is when there is no attachment or no spontaneous loving service to the Lord, and one is engaged in the service of the Lord simply out of obedience to the order of the spiritual master or in pursuance of the scriptures. Such obligatory service is called Vaidhi bhakti. What's being referred to here is that there's some faith, in the teachings, in the spiritual master, and in the scriptures. So one has faith, and we'll see faith as a real measure of our level of qualification. But we have some faith in the teachings, and that faith in the teachings makes us want to do it, to actually practice it. It says that through the description is given that through the association of the devotees we get that, it's called the seed, the bhakti lata bij, that seed of devotion, which says here's something valuable, and there is a viable way to attain it, and the rules and regulations, the methodology given in the scriptures and taught by the more advanced devotees are able to deliver that value to you. You're able to attain, to the ultimately attain love of Godhead. And so that when there's something desirable, as we may have talked about this in the Nectar of Instruction, when you have something desirable that is attainable, there's an automatic enthusiasm that springs forth. If you have one or the other, not so much. You may think of something very desirable that there's no way in the world you think you can attain. So you may dream of it, you may think about it wistfully, but you're not going to be all that excited because you can't get there. You may feel disappointed, in fact. If it's something that's not very valuable and you can get it, again, no enthusiasm. Who wants it? But if it's something very valuable and there's a way to get it, so those two components are there in faith, that service to Krishna is a very valuable thing. Our connection with Krishna is a very valuable thing. And we have a way of having it, a way of getting it. Prabhupada, there's a place where he says that the Bhakti Lata Bija are all the rules and regulations and processes of sadhana bhakti. It's a methodology. So if we have faith in that methodology, and we think that the goal is valuable, then it's kind of an intellectual thing. It's our understanding says, this is really good. Let me do it. And that's our motivation. Is there's understanding of great value and understanding that it can be attained. And so therefore we understand what we're supposed to do. We understand, of course, that that's trying to connect us with our deeper nature, but then we try to do it. And so it's that understanding of value and attainability that's motivating our service. That's Vaidhi Bhakti. Following the rules and the regulations. Following the process that you have faith in. That will help you. That you have faith that it's going to work and you can attain the value that you perceive in Bhakti. And then the Raganuga Bhakti, Prabhupada only touches it on this a little bit here, as does Rupa Goswami. He gives an interesting little example, like the very beginnings of Raganuga. We'll find out later on that Raganuga means something very, very specific when it's in its kind of full flowered form. But here he says, Raganuga refers to the point at which, by following the regulative principles, one becomes a little more attached to Krishna and executes devotional service out of natural love. And he gives an interesting example. He says, for example, a person engaged in devotional service may be ordered to rise early in the morning and offer arati, which is a form of deity worship. In the beginning, by the order of his spiritual master, one rises early in the morning and offers arati. But then he develops real attachment. When he gets this attachment, he automatically tries to decorate the deity and prepare different kinds of dresses and thinks of different plans to execute his devotional service nicely. Although it is within the category of practice, this offering of loving service is spontaneous. So you suddenly want to do it very, very well. And you want to do more of it. So the idea of the Raganuga actually is you have you begin to have in its full form, you have this idea of your relationship with Krishna, your eternal relationship with Krishna. And that motivates you. You feel that motivates you in your service. Krishna is your friend, or your son, or your lover, and you follow in the footsteps of a devotee who has that mood, an eternal associate of the Lord. And so, because you feel that strong connection, just like if there's somebody you really care for, right? You will do things for them. Just naturally. It springs out of your heart. So even here in the very beginning, when in the much earlier stages where you don't have an understanding of your actual relationship, you begin to understand that you are related to Krishna. We heard in Bhagavad Gita how he's our friend. And so when we begin to feel more that how we're related, a little in some way, even if it's kind of a generic way, things tend to come out from our heart, and we want to do it nicely. Not just do the process, but do it nicely, do it better, do more. So that's a little bit of a hint of this Raganuga, the very kind of the beginning growth of that is coming out. It's not like it just changes all at once. Right? You go from Vaidhi to Raganuga. Still, throughout until the very higher stages of sadhana, generally more of our motivation will be from our understanding of the value of what we're doing, and how we're obliged to do it. Krishna is, he's the Supreme Lord. He supplies us with everything. He's so kind. He's so merciful. We should do something for him. But more and more we should start to think, how Krishna is so wonderful. We're connected with him, and it could just come out of our heart, just like it does with someone who's very dear to us. And then there's a discussion of the eligibility of the candidate, is what it's called. This is chapter 3. Eligibility of the candidate for accepting devotional service. That's the title of the chapter. And so it says that there are Prabhupada, well, he says the eligibility comes just like we talked about where it comes from. This repeats that really. Eligibility comes from association with Uttama Bhaktas, other people that have it. Devotion, Uttama Bhakti is contagious in one sense. It says, on account of his association with Mahatmas or great souls, 100% in the devotional service of the Lord, one may attain a little bit of attraction for Sri Krishna. And we talked about how that can even happen build up over lifetimes. And he says, this attraction for Krishna consciousness in association with pure devotees is the sign of great fortune. It is confirmed by Lord Chaitanya that only the fortunate persons, by the mercy of both the bona fide spiritual master and Krishna, will get the seed of devotional service. Lord Chaitanya gives an analysis of that, how there's very few souls that are in human form. Most of those are not engaged with pious activities. Most of them are, just kind of doing it routinely, without any real consideration. Hardly anybody takes up the path of bhakti. And so he says, it's only by this great fortune that somehow meets up with a devotee that touches his heart enough that they'll take up the practice of bhakti. So it's by some great fortune, and that's how it's gotten. And in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and also here Prabhupada gives a translation of this verse. Prabhupada, what he says in the Nectar of Devotion is, he quotes this verse. Rupa Goswami says, gives a little verse in the Nectar of in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and quotes this verse here. If somehow or other, by good fortune, one develops faith in hearing and chanting my glories, such a person, being neither disgusted with nor very much attached to material life, should achieve perfection through the path of loving devotion to me. This is the BBT translation of the 11th canto. Prabhupada didn't do this. His translation, there's these two words here, nirvano and nati sakto. And nirvano means disgusted by or detached from, and not that. There's na means not that, and sakto means attached to. And so Prabhupada applies the nirvano, not completely detached, to material desires, and he applies the nati asakto, not very attached, to bhakti. And he says that even if, and so he translates this verse that if somewhat by good fortune one develops bhakti, and even though he's not detached from material desires and enjoyment, and even if he's not very attached to bhakti, he succeeds. And he mentions before that, following Rupa Goswami's initial statement of that, Rupa Goswami says that they're not asakto, not attached, and they don't have too much vairagya, detachment, is how he puts it in his original statement. And Prabhupada says there also, he says that someone may have a little bit of attachment for Krishna, but still have very, very strong attachment to material things, and not be prepared, he says, not be prepared to practice renunciation. But he said that person can still be successful. And he said he gives it what he says is if they have unflinching attachment for Krishna. So he gives what he does is he gives a definition of what a proper balance is. Because what it says is if you have too much attachment, this is understood. Also, Jiva Goswami comments is this: if you're too attached to material things, if it's just too strong, you can't enter pure devotional service because you'll have an ulterior motive. You'll worship Krishna in order to have material things. You just can't help yourself. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, you are qualified for karma. That's what your qualification is. Mhm. But Prabhupada says, if somehow or other the attachment is strong enough that it becomes kind of stable, I say persistent. If it's persistent, he says, then you can be successful, even though you have even very strong, he says, attachment for material things. That attraction for Krishna remains persistent, then it's possible for you to do it. So Prabhupada here in his presentation, and Jiva Goswami also does something very similar when he comments on this 11:28, Canto 11, Chapter 20, Text 8. He also takes a similar take as Srila Prabhupada does on it. And he talks about how even if we still have these material attachments, that if we continue to serve Krishna, they can go away. That as long as they're not too strong, right, to make us not be able to take up pure bhakti. But then Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has an understanding that also incorporates this renunciation. And this translation we have in the BBT is more in line with his presentation, where he says this nirvana, they're not disgusted and they're not very much attached. He applies both of those to material nature, rather than one to the not sufficiently renounced and the not very attached to bhakti. Prabhupada talks about the nirvana as being not very attached, or not very detached from material enjoyment, and not very attached to bhakti. Here, Vishwanath and then the BBT talk more about not being too detached or disgusted by material nature, and not being too attached to it. Both of those things to applying to material nature. And the reason why this is kind of interesting is it also kind of fits into, usually when you have these things, when acharyas come at different angles, it means they're both true. And to me, for people here in this modern world, I don't think there's too many people who are too renounced. Most people are too attached. So when I heard Prabhupada, translate that as saying that, that even though you still have material attachments, and even though your attachment to bhakti is not so strong, you can become siddhida, you can come to perfection. That gives me a great deal of relief. I definitely don't have the problem of being too renounced or too disgusted with material nature. And so that one may not be so relevant for most people in the world, but it does kind of fit into the flow of things here in the Nectar of Devotion. So that's why I brought it up. And so here it says, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur indicates that false renunciation, and that doesn't mean yukta vairagya. We'll talk about that later, where you engage everything in Krishna's service. You don't think of yourself the owner. Coming from being disgusted by material things is not good for the development of bhakti because it's conducive to jnana. And in a later chapter, Rupa Goswami will say that such renunciation makes the heart hard and is unsuitable for bhakti. So that part is also valid. To look at it that way is also a valid way to look at it. That one shouldn't be either too attached to material things or one shouldn't be too averse to them. Because what happens is that sort of renunciation leads to a desire for mukti, or liberation. And we're going to hear later that mukti and bhukti and mukti, material enjoyment and and the desire for liberation, are both obstacles on the path. So that's why I brought this other understanding into it, because it kind of fits into the flow of things. It may not be something that most of us worry about, but it kind of explains the flow of the chapters here. Okay. So someone has to have the association of the devotees. That's the main thing. And they shouldn't be so attached, at least, to material things that they can't not want to worship for something material. so that they can't avoid having an ulterior motive. And also, if they're so averse to the world that they just want to get out of it and be liberated, that's going to make it difficult. They're going to worship Krishna for liberation, not service. Both of those things can cause a similar problem. So then Prabhupada says, Rupa Goswami says, there's 3 levels of eligibility. Prabhupada said before they were distinguished on the basis of their levels of taste or attraction. So there's the first, second, and third class devotees. The first class, he calls them, is Uttama Adhikari, the highest qualification. Adhikari is like a qualification. So for the highest qualification, and I'm just quoting here from the Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada says, the devotee in the first or uppermost class is described as follows. He is very expert in the study of relevant scriptures, and he is also expert in putting forward arguments in terms of those scriptures. He can very nicely present conclusions with perfect discretion, and can consider the ways of devotional service in a decisive way. He understands perfectly that the ultimate goal of life is to attain to the transcendental loving service of Krishna, and he knows that Krishna is the only object of worship and love. And I believe Prabhupada connects that, and here he does also connects those two things: the relevant scriptures, scriptural knowledge and understanding, leads you to the kinds of understanding that makes you have faith. And we saw that. We're going to talk about this later. We saw that also in Bhagavad Gita. So the two things are connected. We'll see that there's 2 things here. And he says the first class devotee never deviates from the principles of higher authority, and he attains firm faith in the scriptures by understanding with all reason and arguments. And then he says, the first class devotee, and then he gives an interesting thing. This isn't part of Rupa Goswami's definition, but I think it helps to give clarity to us how one gets to that point. Make no mistake. He says the first class devotee is one who has strictly followed the rules and regulations under the training of a bona fide spiritual master, and has nicely obeyed him in accord with revealed scriptures. Thus, being fully trained to preach and become a spiritual master himself, he is considered first class. And then he sums it up. He says, in other words, one who has attained a mature determination in the matter of devotional service can be accepted as the first class devotee. So we're going to see these things. There's a level of faith, and which means also determination, and a level of scriptural understanding that forms the basis for these definitions. And so those 2 things are related, as we'll talk about. And then there's the Madhyama Adhikari, middle. So it's the one who has a middle qualification. 2 is in the middle. The second class devotee. The second class devotee has been defined by the following symptoms. He is not very expert in arguing on the strength of revealed scripture, but he has firm faith in the objective. The purport of this description is that the second-class devotee has firm faith in the procedure of devotional service under Krishna, but he may sometimes fail to offer arguments and decisions on the strength of revealed scripture to an opposing party. But at the same time, he is still undaunted with himself as to his decision that Krishna is the supreme object of worship. And then the third class, Prabhupada calls them neophytes many times, or the Kanishta Adhikari, is what it is. The neophyte or third-class devotee is one whose faith is not strong, and who at the same time does not recognize the decision of the revealed scripture. The neophyte's faith can be changed by someone else with strong arguments or by an opposite decision. Unlike the second-class devotee who also cannot put forward arguments and evidences from the scripture, but who still has all faith in the objective, the neophyte has no firm faith in the objective. Thus he is called the neophyte devotee. So both of those things, knowledge of the scriptures and the faith is weak. So and where the Madhyama, his faith outstrips the expertise in the scriptures. So I think my understanding is that at least the person will know the real important things. Because what happens, with the when you look at the scriptural knowledge, and especially with regard to the practice of bhakti, you have principles and you have applications. And so someone who's very, very knowledgeable will know how to apply them and how to do it in different, the practical application. We always say the devil is in the details. So it's like that. It's you not only know the basic principles, but you know all the subtleties and you know all the practical applications. So that person can always defend the path of devotional service from any kind of argument. It knows how to do it. It knows how to apply the teachings very, very well. So the person has very, very firm faith and can defend the faith very easily. The Madhyama may not be as expert in the application and all those sorts of things, but at least understands the main points that form the basis of the faith. And so the faith is very, very strong. Even if somebody can seemingly, present a stronger argument, it doesn't disturb them. They still have firm faith that they're on the right path. They just don't have enough knowledge to defeat the other person's argument. But they're convinced that if they knew more, they could. And then the Kanishta, it's very, very weak faith and a correspondingly weak knowledge. So that their position is quite tenuous, and they need good association. Now, Srila Prabhupada, Rupa Goswami mentions the four pious types of persons listed in the Bhagavad Gita 7:16 who take up devotional service, and he says that if they through the association for the mercy, Rupa Goswami says is that if they have the mercy of the Lord or the devotees, they can give up their impurities and they can become pure devotees. Prabhupada is going to he's going to include these devotees he's going to widen the definition of Kanishta a little bit, and he's going to take them as being Kanishtas here in the Nectar of Devotion. And so he says, and these examples given here are given by Rupa Goswami, that Gajendra, the elephant who was being attacked by the crocodile, was distressed and was praying to the Lord. Dhruva, he wanted his father's kingdom. Actually, he wanted a kingdom greater than anybody else had in his family. And then the Shonaka and the other sages at Nimesharanya were inquisitive. And Vishwanath says they were thinking about things like Swarga, Loka, the heavenly planets, and things. They had wanted all different kinds of information. And the four Kumaras were wise, saintly persons. So those are the verse from Bhagavad Gita is here. O best among the Bharatas, four kinds of pious men begin to render devotional service unto me: the distressed, the desire of wealth, the inquisitive, and he who is searching for knowledge of the Absolute. We heard when we analyzed this in our Bhagavad Gita classes, we took these persons as mixed devotees. That they didn't, none of them could pass both the Anya Bilashta Shunyam, the ulterior motive test, and the Jnana Karmadyanavratam, the being covered by karma, jnana, or yoga, or some other kind of spiritual process. This was the understanding that we had, and Prabhupada also in Bhagavad Gita he says something similar. So technically, these devotees are not in the category of Uttama Bhakti. They don't. The Nectar of Devotion is all about that. This Uttama Bhakti. That's why it starts out with the definition, because they either have an ulterior motive or are attached to some other process. And Prabhupada in the Bhagavad Gita, in his commentary on this verse, says these persons come to the Supreme Lord for devotional service under different conditions. These are not pure devotees because they have some aspiration to fulfill in exchange for devotional service. Pure devotional service is without aspiration and without desire for material profit. Then he gives the verse, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1:111, Anya Balashta Shunyam Jnana Karmadyanavratam Anukuliyena Kishanu Shilanam Bhakti Uttama And he translates this: one should render transcendental loving service to the Supreme Lord Krishna favorably and without desire for material profit or gain through fruitive activities or philosophical speculation. That is called pure devotional service. So Prabhupada is aware that they don't fit the strict definition, the ones that that are being talked about here. But he says also in his purport of 716 Bhagavad Gita, he says, when these four kinds of persons come to the Supreme Lord for devotional service and are completely purified by the association of a pure devotee, they also become pure devotees. And then he mentions a similar thing here in the Nectar of Devotion. He says, so that is the way of elevating oneself. In whatever condition one may be, if he is fortunate enough to associate with pure devotees, then very quickly he is elevated to the second class or first class platform. And he mentions how Gajendra, gave up his concern about being distressed. How Dhruva no longer wanted the kingdom. How we've heard in the Bhagavatam how the Kumaras, when they went to visit Lord Vishnu, they were thinking that they were attached to Brahman, and then they realized that the personal form was the highest thing, and that also that by hearing the Bhagavatam, Shaunaka and the other sages became very attached to Krishna. So he mentions this. So he's implying that there's a little transformation that takes place in order for them to come into the category. But it makes sense to me, since you see how weak the Kanishtas are. They really need a good association to improve. And these other persons, because they've approached Krishna already, are really ripe. If they get some good association, they can flip and become give up their mixed devotion and have faith in pure devotion. So Prabhupada, in this case, seems comfortable to lump them together because there's not a whole lot of practical difference between them. There's a technical difference, but it is not a whole practical one. If the Kanishtas don't get good association, they're not going to advance. And if these mixed bhaktas don't get good association, they can't become pure. But if they both get it, they can move forward quite well. So it makes sense that he includes them in there. Because those are the kind of people we're going to see a lot of. People are going to come out of distress and wanting something and that sort of thing. So I want to mention that so the definition of the different classes of devotees emphasizes the different levels of faith and scriptural knowledge. And I kind of mentioned this already, that scriptural knowledge is a strong component of one's faith in the value and feasibility of devotional service. We saw this in Bhagavad Gita, how when we got to those middle chapters, how Krishna was explaining, how he's the source of everything. He's pervading everything. All of the different paths of Dharma, everything you do. He says, everyone follows my path in all respects. And that's whether it's a spiritual or religious path, a dharmic path, or any path, a karmic path. Everything is Krishna's energy. And he's the controller and the source of everything. So if you understand that fact, and you understand especially that Krishna is friendly to us. He says over and over and over that he's our well-wisher. He says he'll help us in the path of devotion. He says he'll carry to you what you lack and preserve what you have. When you hear these things, it makes sense that that's all you have to do is worship Krishna. There's nothing else that you have to do. That this is a strong source of faith. That Krishna is not just another being, not even just a powerful one, but he's it. So when we understand the real situation of who we are, who Krishna is, what's how the world is existing, and what happens with that, the pure devotional service becomes a very, very almost obvious choice. So that the knowledge and the scriptural knowledge about devotion and the practice, both things that's valuable and that it can be done, inspire the adoption of devotional service. So Prabhupada says, it is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita that after many, many births, when one becomes actually wise, he surrenders unto Vasudeva, knowing perfectly well that he, That Krishna, Vasudeva, is the origin and cause of all causes. See, that's one of the things we just mentioned. That if you know that he's not just a powerful being or even the most powerful being, but he's the source of it, the origin and cause of all causes. And then if you deal with him, who else do you have to deal with? Without being elevated to the position of a jnani or wise man, one cannot stick to the principle of worshiping the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The less intelligent, or those whose intelligence has been taken away by the spell of Maya, are attached to different demigods on account of the influence of the modes of nature. So he's saying that we have to come to that level to take up and to continue on the path of bhakti. He says, but a wise man who seeks Krishna knows perfectly well that he is spirit, soul, or Brahman, and that Krishna is the supreme spirit, soul, or Para-Brahman. He knows that the spirit soul, being subordinate and finite, should always dovetail himself with the infinite and supreme soul Krishna. That is the relationship of the wise man with Krishna. So we can see that there's that relationship between knowledge and faith and understanding. So that's why you see those two things are there in those definitions. And then Rupa Goswami, he changes and he talks about this bhukti and mukti. And he says the desires for material enjoyment, he doesn't say this is me giving a title to this, is the desires for material enjoyment and or liberation are obstacles on the path of Uttama Bhakti. And Prabhupada says, therefore anyone who has any desire or aspiration for satisfying his senses by becoming more and more important, either in the material sense or in the spiritual sense, cannot actually relish the really sweet taste of devotional service. Srila Rupa Goswami has therefore compared possessing these bhukti, material, and mukti liberation desires with being influenced by the black art of a witch, Pishachi. In both cases, one is in trouble, he says. Bhukti means material enjoyment, and mukti means to become freed from material anxiety and to become one with the Lord. These desires are compared to being haunted by ghosts and witches. Because while these aspirations for material enjoyment or spiritual oneness with the Supreme remain, no one can relish the actual transcendental taste of devotional service. Rupa Goswami mentions this precisely, that you can't experience the happiness of devotional service, or at least the full happiness of devotional service. So this is interesting to take a look at, because we know that too much desire for bhukti, material enjoyment, or too much desire for liberation will influence us either to not worship Krishna, maybe worship the devatas or something to try to get some material enjoyment, or to worship him if we're intelligent, more intelligent than that, but not intelligent enough, to worship Krishna to get those things. That we see those things as more important than Krishna himself. So that means that that Uttama Bhakti can't arise in such a person. These other things are just of too much value in their eyes to sacrifice. But it is possible, and of course I think we know from our own experience, that just because we decide to worship Krishna, and even if we believe quite sincerely that serving Krishna is an end in itself, and that we're not doing our worship to attain something else, that we still may have both of these desires of bhukti and mukti. There's a threshold there. Right? Prabhupada already mentioned that somebody who still has that kind of persistent attachment, they can take up the process of Uttama Bhakti even though they have these material attachments. If they're not so strong as to totally cloud our minds, we can realize that we may realize they're not actually the goal of life. They're not actually that important. We're just attached to them. And so we don't worship Krishna to get those things. We realize Krishna is the most important. So it's possible to take up pure devotional service or uttama bhakti, even though these other desires, the bhukti and mukti desires, are present. I think that's been clear by what we've seen so far. And so while they're there, even though we may be able to take it up, they're really inhibiting. Right? They're distracting us and reduce our ability to progress. They reduce the ability to experience the bliss that helps to fuel our progress. And so if we have too many material attachments, that's going to distract us. By them, we want to indulge in them. If we're averse, we have this disgust with material things, it also may inhibit us from serving, because the material world just seems so horrible. We're supposed to see the world as belonging to Krishna and it being Krishna's energy, a lower type of energy. But it's Krishna's energy and can be used in his service. Prabhupada uses that example. Right? If there's a wallet lying on the street with money in it, if you take it, you're a thief. And he says if you just walk past it and leave it, you're less intelligent. He says you should take it up and give it to the person who owns it. That's real intelligence. So that's the two things. If you're attached to the money, right, then you're going to want to enjoy it. You'll be trying to steal it. You'll be trying to enjoy the world even though it's Krishna's property. If you're averse to it, then you just avoid it. You don't engage it in Krishna's service. So it may inhibit your ability to serve Krishna. Even if that's not why you're serving, even if it's not strong enough to say, I'm serving for liberation, but just that aversion to the world makes it difficult for you to engage everything in Krishna's service. So these two things will cause us to weaken our devotion, interrupt it. Once we take up the path of devotional service, there's this situation called anishtata, unsteadiness, and these things contribute to our unsteadiness. So we can't be as focused, we can't be remembering Krishna as much as we should, we can't be as intense about our service as we could and should be, and therefore we don't get the level of happiness that we could have, which will push us beyond. So the rest of this chapter and the next chapter, the whole next chapter of the Nectar of Devotion, are going to talk about, they're going to give these beautiful verses which discuss, it says, demonstrate how advanced devotees who are free from these desires experience them to be utterly insignificant. And so it's really meant, this is like an inoculation here, a dose of some strong medicine to help us to try to remove these, reduce, let's say, we have to go one step at a time. You reduce the level of desires we have for bhukti, material enjoyment, and mukti, a non-devotional liberation, by being inspired and encouraged by the beautiful verses that Rupa Goswami quotes in this one and also in the next chapter of Nectar of Devotion. So it's really meant to help us move forward. We've come to the point, most of us who are going to be listening here, or maybe everyone, of being convinced of the process of pure devotion. But most of us have not come in fully free from these desires for bhukti and mukti. They have somehow they've been reduced enough so as not to trigger the ulterior motive clause, and we've been allowed to come into the arena of pure bhakti. We've understood that pleasing Krishna is the most important thing, and not for what he can give us, but just because it's valuable in itself. But we're still suffering from these problems, aversion to the world or attachment to it. We haven't come to that point where we see it all as Krishna's energy and always use it exclusively in his service. And so that's causing us to stagnate. It's causing us to have to be blocked and move more slowly forward than we otherwise could. So Rupa Goswami gives us this beautiful medicine to try to encourage us to reduce these things and to try to taste the happiness that comes from it, and to proceed forward. I'm going to go back afterwards, and I'm going to replace. I missed a couple of sections in my PowerPoint. I had an outline some other place and then transferred it, and so somehow I missed it, and I'm going to go back and do it. I think I remembered it as I had it though, so I don't think we really suffered too much. But I'm going to put it there so that it'll be down there in writing, because Prabhupada explained that first part of the third chapter very, very nicely, and I don't want to have that missing from what's written down here. So that's all we've got for today. I didn't think we'd have time to go further, and so next time we'll pick up with kind of where we left off with chapter 4, and we're going to go on, and pretty soon we're going to reach the chapters where there's the whole list of all the different items of sadhana bhakti. So many different items. We'll pass through those fairly quickly, because we probably already know there's the 5 potent forms of bhakti, of sadhana bhakti, that we're going to emphasize.